and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. MBOM is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at MBOM, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Today on the podcast, I am really thrilled to be joined by Amy Ippoliti. Amy is the co-author of The Art and Business of Teaching Yoga and co-founder of Vesselify, formerly 90 Monkeys, an online resource for yoga professionals. She teaches on yogainternational.com and has been a presenter at the Omega Institute, Esalen, and Kripalu, as well as the Telluride Yoga Festival and Hanuman Festival. And I actually did a workshop with Amy probably about a decade ago. I'm not sure if it was 2014 or 2015 at my home studio in Canmore, Alberta. And she's been somebody that I have followed ever since. And so I was really thrilled when she released her book, The Art and Business of Teaching Yoga, back in 2016. This was a super, super helpful resource for me as a pretty new yoga teacher at the time. And so I'm really thrilled to have the chance to talk with her about her background with yoga, how she's been able to grow a thriving career in yoga, and ultimately what inspired her to write The Art and Business of Teaching Yoga. And then we also dive into some of the major updates that have happened to the book since it was re-released in 2024. So obviously the yoga industry has gone through some major, major changes in the last 8 years since it was released, particularly through the pandemic and these post-pandemic days when so much stuff is online. So I was really excited to dive in with Amy and get to hear some of the updates that they made. So without further ado, let's dive into this episode. It's jam-packed with goodness. And Amy was just a pleasure to talk to. So here she is. Welcome to the podcast today, Amy. I'm really excited to have you here with me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Amanda.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thrilled to chat with you. And I was telling you beforehand, I've actually done a workshop with you and I loved it. So I've been following your teaching ever since. And I was so thrilled when you released your book because you released it, I think 2016 was the first time, and I started teaching in 2015. So it was perfect for me when I was a new baby yoga teacher. And I'm really excited to dive into all the updates you guys have done with that. But before we get there, I feel like you have this extensive career, this great background. So I want to hear a bit of that. But where are you joining us from today?
I'm joining from home in Boulder, Colorado.
Amazing. It's a beautiful, beautiful part of the world.
Definitely. You know beauty when you see it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I was telling you I'm from the Canadian Rocky Mountains, and it's like, I always knew it was beautiful, but now that I live abroad, it's like when I go back, I'm like, okay, I get why people want to come here.
Oh, it's just majestic.
Yeah, it's really, really magical. And I'd love to hear a little bit about your background with yoga. I know you've been teaching for a long time. Can you tell us a little bit about how you first got into yoga, what inspired you to become a teacher, all that good stuff?
Yeah, I was 16 when I got into yoga. So at about the same age, I was really having difficulty with the kids at school. So the popularity contests with the mean girls, it was like a stereotype of mean girl popularity contests. And at the time, I felt this incredible compassion for those who were not in the popular group. Like I could sort of cross both populations, if you will, and had this sort of, weird desire to be one of the popular girls, but also this compassion for those who would never be in that role. And so I ended up sort of siding with the folks that were kind of the oddballs out, the wallflowers, et cetera. And it just occurred to me, there's got to be more to life than this superficial, what you wear gets you into the cool club type of deal. And that led me toward a sort of spiritual questioning. I was really asking a lot of questions who am I and why am I here? And what is life all about? And shouldn't there be more to life than this ridiculous, superficial sort of concern about fashion and, hairstyles and makeup and all this garbage. And that sort of questioning led me not only to yoga, but to books on spirituality and stuff like that. That's like a whole other story I could tell. But long story short, my mom and I both worked out at this little fitness boutique, and they added yoga to the schedule. And she said, "Hey, do you want to try yoga? Do you want to go to a class together?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do that." And, it was just like all over after that. And I went to the first class and it was like, oh my God, this has the answers I'm looking for, not just the physicality of it. It was much more to me like the mystical part of it that drew me in. And then I just started doing yoga as much as I could throughout high school. And then college, when I would go home to New York during breaks, I would take class. And then when I got out of college is when I really got serious about it because there was so much access in New York at that time. And then, that led to teacher training at a very young age. And, the rest is history.
Do you have a small studio but are paying big studio fees for your software? Not all studios need the bells and whistles that come with a huge software package or the high price tag. Our friends at Offering Tree have stepped up to help folks like you by creating a boutique studio package. The Studio Light package is everything a smaller studio needs to be successful, including all the Offering Tree features, plus financial reporting, payroll, marketing, automations, and more. With a login for up to 3 staff members, this could be the switch that makes your studio thrive. Pricing for the Studio Light package starts at just $100 US a month, including a free trial. So head on over to Offering Tree to learn more about how the software can bring you success in 2024. To learn more, book a demo, and access my partner discount of 15% off your first year, you can head on over to offeringtree.com/MBO. Once again, that's offeringtree.com/MBO. All right, now back to the show.
Yeah, that's like so cool that you found yoga at such a young age, because I'm imagining like yoga was much less popular than it is in 2024 when you were 16. And I feel like being 16 and like questioning that stuff is just shows a lot about like who you are and your character and stuff. Cause so many kids are not looking at the deeper stuff other than just like, I want to be with the cool kids, like you said. And then to be able to actually like find those classes and go to them and keep pursuing it is really cool to hear. It definitely feels like yoga was destined to find you. You were destined to find it.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. I agree.
Yeah, for sure. And so you studied at college and then you did your teacher training. Were you working like a job related to your college degree when you did your teacher training? Or were you kind of like, I'm just doing this college thing because that's what I'm supposed to do? Or where were you at kind of professionally at that point?
You mean when I got out of college?
Yeah. And we're kind of like, hey, let's do a teacher training.
Yeah, I was sort of lost after college. I remember having a friend from my college who had graduated a year after me saying, he's like, if you're confused about what to do, he's just like, just jump in and do something arbitrary. Just do anything because it will lead you to the next thing. Because I was being so precious about like, I have to, know what my calling is and then like get a job in that. And I didn't know what my calling was. And so that advice to just do something arbitrary was really great. So that led me to a number of hodgepodge gigs, a little bit of acting, a little bit of babysitting my baby sister twice a week, and then working at an environmental department store in Soho, which was a phenomenal job. I learned all about how important it is to have organic cotton sheets on your bed and not conventionally grown cotton, and, reclaimed materials for your furniture and household products and chemicals, and how, it's so important to have biodegradable household cleaners and skincare and, body care stuff. So it was like this little, it was actually a huge department, quote unquote, department store for eco. So I learned all about like, even ecological construction, like how you don't want to use particle board and things that have formaldehyde and, chemical sensitivity and all these things. So I was sort of bouncing between that job and babysitting my little sister. And then I was also teaching fitness classes, believe it or not, because I was quite the little fitness geek as a teen. And so I learned how to teach aerobics classes and things like that. I had always had a calling toward teaching. I will tell you that. And so I was just practicing yoga, 24 years old, 22 years old, and never in a million years thought I was old enough to teach yoga. So it didn't even occur to me to teach yoga. So I just sort of kept doing these jobs, teaching fitness. I also taught self-defense and empowerment classes for women, men, and teens. Learned how to do that because I took the course and then loved it so much that I was like, oh, I could teach this. So I was always teaching movement and continuing my yoga practice. And it was then around 26 years old so maybe 4 years out of college, that Cindy Lee, who was the main teacher I was practicing with at the time, she announced that she was going to be leading a teacher training, her first. And I got up the guts to say, I want the application, I want to join. But it was with the intention of going deeper in the practice. I never thought I was old enough to be a yoga teacher. So I told her on the first night, my intention is to learn and go deeper and understand the philosophy, but there's no way I'm going to teach. I'm only 26, and she was like, shut up, you're going to teach. So that was, she believed in me, like, you're going to teach. And then I was like, oh, I could do this, so then it all shifted. And I, like, she believed in me. That was all I needed to know, to have permission, which is so funny because now like 18-year-olds take yoga teacher training. And I was 26.
I was going to ask you your thoughts on because I feel like for me, my holdback was like, oh, I'm, there's so many like advanced poses I can't do. I don't know if I'm like ready to be a teacher because I don't know if I'm like I guess like a quote unquote, like good enough yogi yet to teach. And I feel like a lot of us experience this, like, I'm not blank enough. Right. And I'm kind of curious your thoughts on that when it comes to new teachers. Like, do we have to be a certain age? Do we have to have a certain amount of poses? Or is it just like, if we want to teach, we should just go teach? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like looking back, especially having that experience.
Well, for me, what the I'm not blank enough was like, I'm not wise enough or, old enough to have the wisdom to impart, so that was mine. But what I learned is that a yoga teacher, it doesn't matter how much you know about yoga or how old you are or how wise you are. All that matters is that you know a little bit more about yoga than the people in the room. So that really helped me. And in fact, one of the things Cindy had me do as soon as I graduated, and she opened Om Yoga Center in New York. Some of you might remember that place. It was legendary. But she had me leading the beginners. So she said, why don't you run a beginner series? And so that was very nice for me because even though I was a beginner teacher, the people coming in clearly knew less than I did. I mean, they were brand new beginners, completely like opening their eyes to this whole new world, which I knew quite a bit about. I'd been teaching, or I'd been practicing at that point, like 12, 13 years. So I knew more than the average Joe. And so teaching beginners can be a really sort of good entry point. We think, oh, well, the most advanced senior level teacher should be teaching the beginners so that they learn it the right way. And that is true. That would be ideal. And at the same time, someone who's newer to teaching yoga, teaching beginners can really be a great way for them to cultivate their teaching skills and build their confidence. But also, they're closer to the newness of yoga. And they might actually be a great teacher for beginners because they're so in touch with being new to it or newer to it, right? So that's what I would say is as long as you know a little bit more than the folks you're teaching, you should have confidence.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing that. And I Yeah, I think there is something about being like close to the experience where you can like really relate to maybe somebody like not having the proprioception of even being in like all fours or something like that. Like sometimes it's when we've been practicing for a while, when we've been teaching for a while, it's really easy to forget that there was maybe a time where like we don't realize where our body is in space.
Totally. And that's exactly it. Beginners are so like, they don't even know where to put themselves on the mat. Like they keep going backwards during sun salutations until they're like not on their mat anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, when you're saying the same thing over, like lift your left leg, lift your left leg, lift your left leg into the air. And it's like, why is this person not doing it? But somebody like, maybe they just like they like think that they've done what you said, but they actually haven't. So I feel like there is.
It really refines your teaching because you realize you have to get down to that level. It's not just, oh, move your thighs back. It's like, make sure you step all the way up or you'll be in the back of the room by the time the sun salutations are over.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I love that. And so your baby you is 26. You're like new yoga teacher. Tell me a little bit about like your career, because obviously you've done a lot of stuff over the last, how long have you been teaching for now?
Oh God, it's so funny. I always have to do the math. It's getting up on 40 years now, which is crazy. No, that's how long I've been doing yoga, is almost 40 years. But teaching is in the high 20s, maybe 25, 26, something like that. 97 is when I started. Somebody do the math for me.
It's not going to be me. I'm going to have to get out my device then.
I know. I'm going to need a calculator.
It's been a long time since I've been in school and needed to do that type of math.
But 97, and they teach, it's like 20 something years. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe can you walk us through like, yeah, baby you starting to teach, what your career looks like, and to basically like where you're at now, kind of high level?
Yeah. I started in 97. And at the time, like you said, yoga was very fringe. So not a lot of people were doing yoga in 97. There was a really quiet scene, I would say, in New York City. And it was really hard for me to get a job. My first jobs were all subbing jobs. So I was subbing for teachers that were flying off to India to study. So they would be like, I'm going to India for a month. Will you cover my class? So I didn't have my own class. I was just subbing for the teachers when they would go to India. And so I was barely making any money, and I was trying to get further certifications. My boyfriend helped me pay for my books because he had a steady job and I didn't. So it was kind of like rocky in the beginning. And then during 90, probably it was like 98, this big article came out about how Madonna, Willem Dafoe, and Sting do yoga. And it went national. Like yoga went crazy. Everybody started wanting yoga. It got national media attention. It was on the news, etc. And all of a sudden, it felt to me anyway, like overnight, not only was I getting my own classes and subbing, but I was book solid. I went from hardly having any classes and subbing when I could to like being overbooked, 18 classes a week. And so I feel like I was in the right place at the right time, to build my reputation and whatnot. And then because of the popularity, all these teacher trainings started cranking out more teachers to fill the need. But then that created this like dearth of teachers where there were too many teachers, which is like sort of where we're at now. And it was really difficult. And I actually started leading teacher trainings like in 2000. I led my first teacher training. What was it? 99. I can't remember, but like I started leading teacher trainings pretty quickly after becoming a teacher because I'm such a teacher. Training teachers also was part of my dharma, right? And so I was noticing that my teacher trainees were unable to get jobs. So the irony is like, I went from not being able to get jobs to like, I had to turn down jobs to like my graduates couldn't get jobs because there were so many yoga teachers. Does that make sense? It was like so psychotic and just like 3 years this period happened, less than 3 years. And so that is what led me to write a book about the business of teaching yoga, was that my teachers, my graduates, who I felt like were my babies, they weren't able to get jobs. In the same way that I was when the boom sort of started. So that's sort of how I began. My dharma is to teach. So teaching workshops came really naturally to me. Leading retreats, I wouldn't say it was as natural because of all the logistics, but once I was down there, like down in a retreat center, I was good. And teacher training was all really natural for me because teaching has always been my thing. Doesn't matter what the topic. It's like, if I know something about it, I'm going to teach others about it.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm curious too, before we kind of dive into your book a little bit, like, do you feel like there's been like kind of waves with the yoga industry since that like first initial boom? Because I feel like what you're talking about from like, the late 90s, early 2000s is also kind of, I feel like, how I entered the industry and like started teaching in 2015. And it was like, you have to like know somebody, or you have to have something that sets you apart to like find a job, because it's like there's like so many people have teacher trainings. Like I feel like at that point I was like, I feel like everyone and their dog has a yoga teacher training and would love to teach, and I wanted to teach too, but I'm like, I can't live off of like one class a week if I actually want to do this. Like that's paying me like $50 a week. That doesn't pay for rent anywhere on the planet. And so I'm kind of curious, like, did you see like waves happen where there was like less teachers and more opportunities, or has it just been like this huge boom basically like through, I guess, the 2000s and what do we call it, like the 2010s?
Yeah, I'd say that, I mean, if you also look at the statistics and the studies that have been done by Yoga Alliance and Yoga Journal, they did a collaborative study. You will see it's just the yoga industry just grew and grew and grew and grew, and it kept growing. So it really depended on where you lived. Big urban areas were just almost impossible in terms of standing out as a teacher, unless, like me, you were in the right place at the right time, or like you said, you knew someone, or you had, a gift for marketing or something like that. And we go over that kind of thing in the book, like, what makes a teacher stand out. There's a lot of factors with that. Some of it is their training and their pedigree, like who they studied with, their lineage. Some of it is, they're just like naturally bendy or like super good looking. Like it could be more superficial, something that makes you stand out. It could be that you have connections or you have skills in marketing or people skills and that kind of thing. And a huge thing right now, if we're to take it all the way to 2024, is that if you have the skill of building community, like you just attract community around you, you're going to be successful in 2024. So I see a wave there that's very different than maybe back in 2010, would have more to do with, like I said, lineage or, your training level or your marketing skills, right? I would say in the 2015 range, a lot of success had to do with social media and how the world sort of started seeing expertise in terms of how many followers somebody had. Oy, don't get me started, versus their actual skill set, right? So in 2015, I think there was a wave of teachers that sort of built their social media following and were really good at that. And they had a level of success in standing out. And now the freaking pandemic hit, it just like kind of shattered everything and like blew it into a million pieces. And now it's really about, can you create community in person, maybe even online too, but in person particularly, you're going to have success in your other offerings. Not only in your group classes, because everybody wants to come and see each other, right? So they come to your class. But then if you're like, oh, I'm doing a workshop, oh, we're all signing up. oh, I'm going on retreat. Oh my God, I can room with my friend and we can go off into the paradise together and hang out. Like, 'cause it's all about hanging out. Right. So yeah, there's been waves.
Yeah.
Definitely been waves.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I definitely know the waves from the time I've been in the industry and stuff like that. And it's been kind of wild. So
I love your question because I've never really articulated that. So thank you.
but I'd love to get into, you guys deciding to write the book and kind of where that came from. And I know it came out, I think, shortly after I launched my podcast, and my podcast really came from me entering this industry and feeling like I've been taught the skills, and obviously, very, very new, very green, but I've been taught the skills. If I can get into a class and have bodies in front of me, I can teach. Like, those are the skills I've been taught. But how do you do that when you have no experience and you're calling yourself a yoga teacher, but you've like never taught yoga outside of your teacher training before? And that was what I was really grappling with. And my background's in business and marketing. And so I was kind of like, is there the ability to like pull from that knowledge and bring it into the yoga space? And so I kind of did that myself before I was like, I think there's something here, and I think we need to be teaching this to yoga teachers. And then your book came out, and I'm like, okay, I must not be wrong about this, because somebody who is, a much more senior teacher than myself is sharing these learnings as well. So I would love to hear just kind of where, like for you, where the inspiration for the book came from, and, what you were seeing with your teacher trainees and the teachers you were working with, and what you were seeing at that time that really inspired you to like, let's talk about not only being a great teacher, but also like creating a great business.
The inspiration for the book came quite early on. Like, it was published in 2016, but really in 2000, I want to say 2002, 2001 is when my first real group of trainees graduated. And I mentioned that as my babies, I was really concerned about them not being able to flourish as yoga teachers financially and whatnot, and unable to get jobs. And then when they finally did get jobs, they had a tough time standing out or attracting enough people to make money, because a lot of the studios in New York were paying teachers by the head. So it meant that there was a shared responsibility in marketing the class with the studio and the teacher, because the teacher was motivated to have more people come because they were being paid by the head, not a flat fee. And so I had a number of teachers would come to me that had graduated and said, so-and-so's class is so full. Like, she has, 70 people coming or 40 people coming, and I can only seem to get 15 or 10 or, whatever. And I don't understand, what am I doing that's making it really hard for me to do as well as this other teacher? And that got me thinking. I wrote a whole essay on like why I thought this teacher, the one teacher was doing so well. And I was like analyzing, like, well, what is she doing? This teacher that's doing so well. And then what's the other teacher doing that's like not attracting people, right? And so there were a whole host of things. And then I was also like, this has to do with marketing and business, and has to do with like there's so many things that make a yoga teacher flourish, right? Like, you have to have a handle on your finances. Like, if you're not managing your finances well, and you don't have a retirement account, and you don't have health insurance, like there's all these like other factors about being an entrepreneur when you don't like, have a paycheck coming from a regular 9-to-5 job. Like, there's all these things you have to consider. And so another factor that I was considering was scheduling. Like, if you're scheduling yourself and wearing yourself thin, running all over town, you're going to teach really poorly. So it was this big analysis, and marketing was a huge piece. Like, I realized, I've been studying yoga philosophy and anatomy and all these subjects, but I haven't studied marketing. You say you're from a marketing and business background. I wasn't. So I thought, I have to jump into studying this career and marketing and business and finances and all the things that make up a successful yoga teacher, as much as I've been studying yoga itself. And so I went into this cave of learning, just really, taking seminars and going off to Arizona and studying with, human potential people. And, I just did all this study in the period between, 2001 or something until about I want to say 2010. So it's like 8 years of like studying how to do this. And in 2010, I created a course that launched in 2011 called 90 Minutes to Change the World. And because back then, you probably remember, classes were about 90 minutes long. Now they're 60. So the name is like totally not right anymore. But 90 minutes to change the world. Like, yoga teachers are in this incredible position to change the world through their teaching and through their community building. And so how do we do that? And so I launched this online course. It was huge. We were very early to the online education world in yoga. So that was part of why it was so successful in terms of like popular. Like we had like 350 people in one course at one of the iterations of the course. And so that was really interesting because I was presenting on everything I had learned in those 8 years, but also interacting with all these teachers and hearing about their pain points and also then seeing how they implemented the teachings from the course and started getting results. And it was like, oh, this is so cool. Like people are getting results. And, people like, we had a fraction of the teachers who started the like body positive movement in the yoga industry, who were graduates of the class. Like Diane Bondi, for example, was one of our graduates. Like they started that whole movement, because it was like also learning about like, well, what is the thing that I can bring to this industry, and that was something that they creatively thought of. So there's folks that are, that started teaching on platforms like Gaia and Glow and that kind of thing because of taking 90 minutes to change the world. And so in 2012, we got the idea to transcribe the course into a book. And so I literally sat there and transcribed everything I had said in these online courses into the book. And that's what came out in 2016. So I started writing it in 2012. And then it was published in 2016. So that's the story.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. That's really cool to hear. And I just love that so much, like the way you were able to kind of look at like, okay, what do my teachers need? Because I feel like, if you didn't have, I guess, your like whole heart in it and caring about your teachers really flourishing, you could have just been like, oh, well, we'll just run another teacher training. We'll just keep pumping teachers out. But it's like, no, we're not going to. Like we're going to keep training teachers, but we also need to look at like, how can we really have them, flourish in this industry? And if they're not flourishing, okay, how can I help them? So I love that you did like that deep dive of study and then created that course and then turned the course into a book. That's incredible. And I know you guys have made some updates recently. So I'd love to hear, obviously the yoga industry has gone through big changes since 2016. Most of it due to the pandemic, but obviously, other economic and whatever factors, technological factors. So I'm curious kind of, some of your, I guess, more like recent tips or more recent things that you're kind of sharing with people through the book and just through your teachings in terms of like how to flourish as a yoga teacher.
Yeah, I would say you're right. The world changed dramatically in the time that we published the book. Not only with social media changes where, TikTok didn't even exist when the book came out. So things like that in social media, we knew we needed to update. And in fact, I tried to update them when I recorded the audio version of the book. I did some little sneaky audio updates on social media primarily because so much had changed right there. Like Snapchat wasn't a thing anymore. It was like, okay. And the main thing, as you said, was the pandemic. So that pushed the industry online. And so what we did, a lot of it was focusing on how do you set up online yoga teaching in terms of equipment needs, Zoom versus on demand. We kind of go over all of that so that yoga teachers now kind of need to be versed in online yoga, since so many studios are still doing hybrid classes where there's a Zoom factor and an in-person factor happening at the same time. So in addition to that, we also go over how do you translate well online as a teacher when there's no feedback loop and you're not in the room with people. And when someone is watching an on-demand video or a Zoom meeting with you, how do you sort of portray yourself in ways that hold their attention, right? Because it's harder to hold someone's attention when you're not in the same room. So it's really important how vibrant you are and how, that you're smiling and that you're engaged and, like all these kinds of things. Like, how do you teach well and translate well on camera? The other piece, and you alluded to this too, is just that there's been so many changes, not only technologically, but socially and environmentally. So we're staring down the barrel of an environmental crisis with the climate. We have social unrest, so much more violence and war and things going on that it's not like those things never existed, but they're just the level of anxiety and unrest that people are dealing with now, our students are dealing with now. It demands that yoga teachers show up in a different way with their leadership. And we go over a whole chapter on that. Like, how do we come forth as leaders, not just, I'm your Pilates teacher, or I'm your dance fitness teacher. Like, that's not necessarily their job. But I feel like in yoga, because we're so connected to history and philosophy and a technology of living skillfully, right? Like, as part of what we do, it's, it's the practice. It's not simply physical, that it's time for us to step up in a deeper way. I've always felt that way, but now in the face of all of this trouble, existential trouble that we're in, and the eco anxiety that's underlying everything, we have a whole chapter now dedicated to what has happened, environmentally and socially and whatnot, and what do we do about it? And so for me, again, these teachings I've always had this philosophy that we don't want to make our yoga class an escape for people. We don't want to bypass what's going on in the real world when we're in class. It's not like you go to class to float away into your happy place. We want yogis and yoginis that we're teaching to check in, not to check out, because then they'll be of greater service to their community. Now, there's an argument to be made that you could go to yoga, go to your happy place, kind of get away from it all, almost like a sanctuary, and then come back and you're able to face the world. I get that argument, but I also see that as only one part of an overall yoga practice. Part of it too is facing it in the practice, letting the practice be the place where we face, right, like some of the difficulties, and then apply the yoga philosophy to those difficulties, and then go back into the world and serve with more awareness. So I give an example in the book of when I looked out. I'm looking out my window right now, but I looked out my window and literally saw a fire start in the valley. And it was a really scary, windy day. And I watched that fire blow toward Louisville, Colorado, where I used to live. And in fact, it was calling up students that I knew that lived there. And I said, you better evacuate, because that thing is going toward your town, and they hadn't even gotten evacuation notices. Well, fast forward, I just started seeing homes light up on the horizon, like right from my window. And we lost 1,000 homes.
Wow. That's terrifying.
And so what do you do as a yoga teacher the next morning after something like, I mean, do you just like, there's this huge elephant in the studio and you're not addressing it? No. What I did is I incorporated it into the class. I said, I've started to bring in, teachings like generosity, compassion, bravery, Vera, heroism. Like, who were the people that rescued the cats and the dogs that got trapped in those homes? Who were the people that started a coat drive? Who were the people that, whose homes did not burn down, let their front porch be a collection site for donations for people who had lost everything, and like, bring that into the class. That's so inspirational. It doesn't have to be doom and gloom. It doesn't have to be like, a Debbie Downer, you're talking about the fire, It's like, no, this is what the community did, and they used yoga teachings of compassion, generosity, bravery, heroism, etc. And there are Sanskrit words for all of those, by the way. And then you bring the philosophy in. And so then you can also end on a note of hope. What can each of us do to reduce our carbon emissions? Could we start a compost pile in our backyard? Could we sign up for compost pickup from an independent compost service provider? Could we commute with a friend to work? Or, can we ride our bike more? It's just all these things like that create hope, And I think also community is so important to create. We mentioned this in that chapter as well, is that if you're not creating community, it's really dangerous right now. Like, community is what's going to save all of us in the situation we find ourselves in with climate and with a lot of systems sort of falling apart. What's going to save us is each other. And so I think, if I could impart one thing, I think I've already imparted it quite a bit in this discussion, is like, community is everything. It's everything.
Totally.
The most successful yoga teachers I'm seeing in 2024, they have community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's important. And I think we can be quite inspirational if we link difficulties that we're all going through as a society to the yoga teaching that gives the balm for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yoga teachings are the balm. The philosophy teachings are the balm for all life's challenges. And so rather than sort of like ignore the challenges and try to take people to just the happy place, which is, you can do that. There's definitely room for that. See about, integrating it as a theme into your class. And we really go over that in the book quite a bit. Like, how do you do that? So cool. So many cool ways to do that. And end your class on a note of hope and a note of action, because we need people going into action. That's the antidote to despair is action, taking action. If you feel hopeless, take action.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the paths of yoga laid out in the Bhagavad Gita, karma yoga, right? So I think, that's my favorite new chapter in the book, is really like getting granular about how we do that, and that we must do that. It's our responsibility to do that as yoga teachers.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I love that, there's like looking at like how the industry shifted and like the practical aspects of like, okay, as a new yoga teacher now, creating an online business is a great way to build revenue in your business. Like, here's how to do that. But then also acknowledging just like where we are at in this like point of history, which I don't know if it's just, there is a lot more going on. I think it's probably that there's a lot of things happening, but we're also so connected, right? So it's like, we're really aware of things that are happening very far from us. And I think that can be really anxiety inducing, because we want to help, but it's like, how do I help when it's like so far from me and it's like not safe for me to go there type thing. And I think that a lot of us grapple with that, especially I think people who are like empathetic, compassionate, and you see a lot of those types of people show up in yoga. And I think as yoga teachers, we do have, it's like big work to not only like teach like the yoga philosophy and to teach like the yoga asana and to do that well, but to also just like hold space for our people to show up the way they need to show up and like work through the things that they're feeling. Cause I just feel like mental health and, anxiety levels are at like an all-time high for so many people right now. And, the pandemic obviously didn't help that. There was a lot of, fear and uncertainty and stuff with that. And now there's, inflation and economic crisis happening. People are in horrible situations. And it's like yoga can be this beautiful way to like process and, like you said, have hope and take action and stuff. But it does need to be guided a little bit. It doesn't just happen on its own. And it's a lot to ask of a teacher.
Yeah, I think you hit what is the expression?
Nail on the head. Is that right?
Hit the nail on the head on that. Like, we know too much. Like, we're exposed to more information than we can handle. And so the anxiety levels are through the roof. And so one of the things I've noticed, and part of this is that I'm older now and I attract older students, but even among my youngest students, I'm noticing that they're not unable, but they're not as psyched to learn the really acrobatic or deeper poses. There's a lot of factors on that. One is that we don't have 90-minute classes anymore. Like, you need the warm-up period. You need that length of time to get to more advanced poses. But I also think it's that they need to rest. Like, what they really need is rest and silence and quiet. And so, my skill as a restorative yoga teacher, I've really leaned on that in the last even 6 years, because that's what's demanded, is that we're not like so in the stimulus. And I think working toward advanced practices or advanced poses, I don't even want to call them advanced, but just like really super bendy poses, is noisy. Right. Whereas being still and kind of, being supported on props and things like that, restorative yoga is what's needed in a world that isn't stopping, in a world that's way too full of information and the feed and just, all these things that we know are happening, but it's too big for us to do something about. We have to do something about it. We have to do our part and take action, but there's a certain amount of it that's out of our control. Like, I can't just press a button and make it go away.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Chip away at it every day as one little person, but I can cope more with what the world is dishing out if I've been in silence and quiet and even darkness, like just tune out the senses a little bit. Like, never has pratyahara been more important, like withdrawal from the senses. Like, we actually need that.
Yeah, our nervous systems are so overstimulated. I feel like this is like what I've been noticing for myself over the last few years. And I wondered for a while, is this just the chapter of life I'm in where I'm just not drawn to these like, fast-paced practices where it's loud, maybe it's noisy, there's music on. It's like what my body needs, what my nervous system needs is to just be, like you're saying, darkness, quiet, stillness, like need that. And that's like, that's how I can start processing the things that I'm seeing, on the news and in social media and like just in day-to-day life. It's like there's so much stuff constantly just at us all the time. And I've had so many conversations with people similar to this where it's like, no, it's not just me. This is the time that we're in. And I think as yoga teachers, like we have tools. We have tools to help people with this, which is really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm just seeing all these deer right outside my window. Okay. I was like, what's moving over there?
That makes me miss home.
I know. Talk about like needing nature too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I totally get that. It's so important. And to remember that yoga is so multifaceted that it can be faster paced and it can be a pursuit of all these like bendy poses, but we also have these other tools. And folks just love it right now. It's wonderful to see people come out of a restorative feeling so renewed, and their immune systems being healthier, and their rest and digest happening, and their ability to think more clearly and sleep better. They sleep better at night when they rest during the day. It's incredible because your body remembers that feeling of being in that parasympathetic nervous system soup, and so then when you hit the pillow, you're like, oh, I remember that. So yeah, resting during the day makes you sleep better. If you sleep better, everything is better.
100%. Yeah, for sure. I love that. I'm so glad that that's a part of the updated version of the book. So thank you for sharing that. I'm curious if there's any like last kind of pieces of wisdom, tips, business lessons that you want to share with listeners before we wrap up today.
I mean, I would say always listen to what the industry is asking of you. So what I've noticed with the pandemic is that when things change so radically, a lot of teachers just couldn't hack the change. And so they just gave up on yoga. They gave up on their careers. And so and that's fine, by the way, if you felt drawn to something else. But if you are at all, sincerely wanting to stick it out, just keep listening to what's needed in your community, what's needed from different studios that you might work with, and be open to change, because I think there's a way to still love your yoga and love what you do if you can respond to the moment. And Lord knows my yoga career has changed drastically since 2020. And I'm actually like pretty happy about it because I'm just responding to what happened rather than trying to hold on to something that doesn't exist anymore. It's like embracing the new normal. So I think that would be my advice, is just embrace the new normal and then create something beautiful in the new normal.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I feel like being adaptable is really important. And I think for teachers who are maybe like newer is like the first kind of really, really big change that had happened. But I think when you've kind of like the longer you've lived, obviously, the more you see, but it's like the longer you've taught, the more you kind of like go with the shifts and changes and you learn to be adaptable. But I do think that it's kind of like surfing a little bit. Not that I'm like a surfer at all. I'm a terrible surfer, but I'm going to try to go with this analogy. It's like you can fight against the waves or you can go with the waves. And in order to actually like stand up and have success with it, you have to go with the waves. Right. And I think that that's a little bit of what we have to do with life too.
And you have to actually paddle ahead of the wave a little bit when you're first entering. You have to paddle faster than the wave or it'll smack you down. And I would also, there's one other thing I would say is that if you do find that it's more challenging to make ends meet as a yoga teacher, please don't feel like you have to only be a yoga teacher, right? Like be open to other sources of income is what I would say, so that your yoga can always be, what's the word? Like you get to do it. You don't have to do it. Right. So if there's other sources of income that allow you to walk into a yoga space and teach from your heart and not be worried about money. Does that make sense?
Teaching from like with a full cup rather than an empty cup.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like that the energy comes through, even if it's very, very subtle. I feel like we feel that like energetic difference of a teacher who like needs bodies in the room or, needs the money to like pay their rent. Like they're going to get evicted if they can't teach these classes versus somebody who can come in very full and easeful.
Yeah. And I would also say like, just because you teach yoga doesn't mean you can't build wealth for your family. Like focus on building wealth, right? So that you're going to be okay in the future. Just because you do yoga doesn't mean you have to be poor, right? Because you don't make that much money doing it. Find other ways to make money. It's okay. Build wealth so you have security and stability in your life and for your family. Mm-hmm. I would also say that study wealth building, because if you have wealth, not only can you protect yourself and your family, but you might even be able to help others. Not might, you will be able to help others. So And I don't mean wealth like in a, destroy resources of the planet wealth. I just mean, be smart.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. This is probably like a whole different topic, so we don't have to dive too far in it just for the sake of time. But I think sometimes as yogis and as yoga teachers, we get a little like, we can have like kind of this like icky experience with wealth because we think of, oh, these like super rich people are doing these things that I don't like, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, well, just because you are building wealth for your family or for yourself does not mean that you have to be that person. We do have choices with how we make our money and who we make our money from and who we serve and how we use it. And having wealth can actually, open a lot of doors and let us really like change the world for the better.
Totally. It's a magnifier. So if you're a dick and you're wealthy, you're going to be that much more of a dick. If you're a good person and you have wealth, you're going to be able to magnify that goodness.
Yeah.
So just remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm curious if we can just wrap up by you sharing with listeners, one, where they can go to find you if they want to do, a training or a course or a workshop with you, and then also where they can find your book.
Yeah. So the book is on all the, bookstore sites, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's the revised and expanded edition, The Art and Business of Teaching Yoga, The Yoga Professional's Guide to a Fulfilling Career. And then my website is just my name.com. So it's amyippoliti.com. So that's spelled IPPOLITI. And I'm AMY. And then we're also at Vesselify.com. So Vesselify, IFY.com. And that's sort of for our teachers. And yeah, we have a few advanced teacher trainings modules a year, several retreats, festivals you can find me at this year. And we have got online courses, on teaching yoga and the business of teaching yoga available on both of those sites. So I would say that's it. And then, of course, social media, we're all there too.
Wonderful. We'll make sure there's links for everything in the show notes. And yeah, I just want to thank you for your time and your energy today. It was really great to have you on the show. And I'm really grateful that we got to connect.
Same. Yeah, really lovely conversation. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
All right, friends, I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast with Amy Ippoliti. Make sure you go check her out, follow along with what she's doing, get a copy of her book. You can get it where all books are sold, like she said. So I have a copy. Definitely go grab your copy. It's an awesome, awesome resource for us to have as yoga teachers. And a big thank you to Offering Tree for sponsoring this episode of the show. You can go check them out at offeringtree.com/MBOM. And of course, thank you so much for being here. Thanks so much for listening, supporting the show, all that goodness. All right, that's all from me. I will see you guys next week. Bye for now. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please make sure you reach out to me at info@mbomyoga.com. And last of all, if you enjoyed this episode of the show, please make sure you hit subscribe and leave a review for the podcast. It would mean the world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.